Pacific Northwest Meditation, July 26th, 2025. So today I thought I would address the five hindrances, um, which are considered temporary visits to the mind. And I have to thank my teacher, Steve Armstrong, for many of the ideas in his talk. Appreciation for his teaching and for all of the teachers that I've gathered information from over the years that helped me put together Dharma talks. But especially the quote that he said in one of his talks on the five hindrances. I've heard it before in other places, but there's something about hearing it again. The mind by nature is radiant and pure, the Buddha said. It is shining. It is because of visiting forces known as the defilements that we suffer. It is because of visiting forces known as defilements that we suffer. So what the Buddha is saying really in short in this little verse is that all of our agony today, all of the suffering, all of the frustration, the disappointment, the anger, the irritation, the expectation, the comparing mind, sleepiness, doubt, worry, all of that. And all that we've ever experienced in our lives or ever will is caused by a force or forces that occasionally visit the mind. That's a powerful statement because inherent in that is the fact or the belief or the reality that it's not part of us. It's not who we are to suffer, but it's only because of a force that occasionally visits the mind, causing suffering. So if defilements are so powerful, we should ask really what they are. Why are they so dangerous and so powerful? How can we work with defilements? And what's the benefit of understanding the defilements? They're also referred to as hindrances because they hinder our ability to see clearly. And if we can answer those questions or at least investigate those questions, we'll be well on our way to a life free of suffering. The defilements are all forms of greed, aversion, or delusion, as I was talking about in the sitting practice. Greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed, aversion, and delusion. The defilements are all forms of this. Thoughts, feelings, moods, activities, behaviors that are influenced or conditioned by greed, aversion, or delusion. And these hindrances, they aren't punishments or defects. They're just habits of the mind, natural, but unhelpful. And they arise and obscure our clarity, our peace, our capacity for awakening. In Pali, they're called nivarana, which means that which hinders or obstructs. Like the five big rocks on the path that we keep tripping over again and again. Joseph Goldstein, who's the founder of Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, has written this beautiful book, Mindfulness, A Practical Guide for Awakening. And in it, he explains the four foundations of mindfulness. And in the fourth foundation, the Buddha teaches mindful of the Dhammas or truths. And he talks first about the hindrances or the defilements. Why does he begin here with the hindrances? when we're not mindful of them, the hindrances envelop the mind and they obstruct it from developing wise discernment regarding skillful or unskillful actions. And they hinder the mind's developing concentration and other awakening factors. And they prevent the realization of the Four Noble Truths. And so in order to proceed on the path, we first need to know how to work skillfully with what impedes our journey. So today I want to spend some time getting to know each of these hindrances, not as enemies to be conquered, but as visitors to be understood. So we start with sensual desire. I'll mention the anecdote and I'll refer to antidotes later, but sensual desire, kamachanda. Sensual desire is the first of the five hindrances that the Buddha invites us to recognize. In Pali, it's called kamachanda. The craving for pleasurable experiences, tastes, sounds, sights, sensations, or even states of mind. It's not bad or wrong, it's just sticky, and it pulls the mind outward and narrows our awareness. The Buddha uses some beautiful similes and to help us understand how each of the hindrances cloud the mind. And so for sensual desire, he says, it's like dye in a pool of water. The water is no longer clear. It's colored by craving. So we can't see ourselves or the world clearly. When desire is present, we might feel restless or preoccupied. It could show up as obsessive longing or just subtle discontent. This is, I think, one of my go-to compassions, this kind of subtle discontent that I'm always noticing. And on the cushion, this can take many forms. Planning lunch, reliving a really sweet memory, or going over a difficult conversation, or fantasizing about a better meditation. Sometimes we catch ourselves noticing a pain in order for it to go away. And I do that. I imagine you probably do too. We catch ourselves noticing this pain and then, or maybe enjoying a pleasant feeling in order for it to last. Joseph Goldstein calls it this in order to mind. And it's also rooted in craving. So the first step is simply to recognize when desire is here. There isn't any judgment. There's just mindfulness when we name it. Something like, desire. We're already less entangled when we name it. And the second step, which is just as important, is notice when desire is not present. And this often goes overlooked. But when we become aware of the mind free of craving, even briefly, we begin to sense its natural clarity and spaciousness. And the Buddha called this the luminous mind. It's calm, it's bright, it's joyful. Not because we got what we wanted, but because we're no longer caught. It can be a subtle kind of contentment. Kamala Masters puts it beautifully. She says, desire can be seductive, but when we bring mindfulness to it, we realize that aliveness is already here. Each time we see desire with awareness, whether it's big and loud or soft and fleeting, we're on the path of awakening. And all of this is to say to be mindful of what is happening in the mind. Mindfulness doesn't mean suppressing the desire. It means seeing the energy of the craving with clarity. In nature, I've seen this too. Last week, I was watching hummingbirds zip around from flower to flower, and it reminded me how quickly the mind darts from one pleasure to the next. And the hummingbird doesn't suffer. It just does its thing. But we do suffer when we're caught in a constant search to satisfy our desires. This happened to me this morning in a conversation with my partner where I realized how much I wanted them to have my opinion about something. And I was really attached, and it was causing him a lot of suffering because he felt unheard. And it caused me suffering because my attachment was to my idea. And when I was able to see the energy of craving and clinging that I was having with mindfulness, it seemed to ease the tension a little bit. So there are some antidotes to sensual desire. And here are 5 possibilities. Mindfulness of the body. When the mind is lost in wanting, we can return to sensations. We can return to posture. We can return to breath and grounded presence in the body. It says in the Satipatthana Sutta, there is nothing so calming to sensual desire as contemplation of the body. There's also a second way of an antidote, reflection on impermanence. Gil Fronsdale says, when we deeply see the changing nature of pleasure, desires start to let go of us. Craving gets sticky, and we imagine something satisfies us permanently, and we can gently reflect, this too is impermanent. This pleasure will pass, can loosen the grip. And there's a third antidote, contentment. Cultivating gratitude for what is, rather than chasing what isn't. Even saying quietly, this is enough, can shift the tone. Sometimes making even a simple note to yourself during your meditation, wanting, 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 is enough to unhook the spell. I'd like to mention Aya Ananda Bodhi, a nun who trained in the forest tradition at Amaravati and Chithurst monasteries in England from 1992 to 2009. And she moved to the US to help establish the Aloka Vihara Forest Monastery. That's a training monastery for women located in California. And it had to disperse last year, or maybe 2 years ago. And so now some of the nuns that were there have spread out, and she and another practitioner now live in Point Townsend in Washington, so they're nearby. And her quote is, contentment is not settling. It's a quiet joy in the simple beauty of the present moment. Contentment is not settling. It's a quiet joy in the simple beauty of the present moment. And a fourth antidote, the Buddha also suggested we reflect on the drawback. We can ask, what does this craving actually lead to? Is it peace or restlessness? This honest inquiry reveals craving's shadow side. I like this reference in the Dhammapada. What now appears as honey on a razor's edge. Honey on a razor's edge. Have to contemplate what the drawbacks are of craving. And lastly is loving kindness, metta. Craving often masks this deeper longing for connection or care, and meeting that underlying feeling with loving kindness can solve the outer grasping. I was doing that this morning in my interaction. I was holding myself in kindness because of the irritation that was arising for me and wanting this conversation to go a certain way, and then just seeing how I could dissolve my grasping to just be open to listening and not having my craving of my opinion being the right one be so important? So this idea of craving can happen on a lot of levels. And one of the things that Kamala Master says is, what we really want is already here when we meet this moment with tenderness. What we really want is already here when we meet this moment with tenderness. It's not always easy when you're in the middle of, especially now the next hindrance, the second hindrance is aversion. And the antidote is loving kindness for aversion. But it's ill will, anger, resentment, irritation, the sharp thorns in the garden of the mind, which I would have to say that, aversion is the mind's way of pushing away, of flinching from life's sharp edges. And the Buddha called us to recognize this striking against in all its disguises: irritation, fear, anger, sorrow, whether fierce like rage or quiet like discouragement, all arise from the same root, what's called dosa, the seed of hatred or ill will. We suffer not only from what happens, but from the way we recoil from it. A thought, a memory, a flicker of pain, and suddenly the heart contracts. Sometimes we think we're being mindful, but our very words betray resistance. It hurts, we're saying to ourselves, with tightening around the experience. And that was kind of what was happening in my conversation. It's like I had aversion to the whole conversation. So much was going on the underneath level of what I was observing. This sort of striking against, this irritation, and there was anger there and sorrow. And then, and then right after that, it came to a good, decent conclusion because I was aware enough. And then I go outside and I have a flat tire. And so, aversion doesn't really wait for events. We get angry sometimes just remembering, sometimes we're afraid just imagining. But what we're really reacting to is a thought. It's a shadow of what might be. And the practice is gentle. We just note it. Anger, ill will, grief, softly and kindly, as many times as it takes. And then at some moment, the mind shifts and the storm passes and we taste this deep truth of impermanence. We can ask ourselves, how am I relating to this? Am I observing or secretly fueling the flame? And when the aversion is strong and mindfulness feels far away, we can turn to patience. Shanti Deva says, why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? And in the warmth of awareness, even aversion can become a teacher, pointing not just to what we reject, but to the vastness of the heart that can learn to hold it all. It took me a couple of hours to see this warmth of awareness when my waiting process and picking up process with the car that had the flat tire and waiting for AAA, and then how long I would have to wait at the car place. And it was really pressing on my time. And, I had irritation and agitation, and I was pretty much in the midst of it and realizing the suffering that was happening because of it. But this stuff just arises due to conditions and stays for as long as it stays. And so eventually I touched upon some vastness that was a little bit more available, and my heart could hold more, and the aversion around it all, subsided better. And it helped that I was checking into my body I was noticing my impatience. I was noticing my disappointment. I just had lots of adjectives, that were arising, and my anxiety, things that happened because I wanted to be sure I was on time. And, Aya Santusika is one of my favorite nuns, and she's near Santa Cruz, and I really like her teachings. And she points out, ill will is not always dramatic. It's the little judgments we carry, the quiet resistance to what is. When we investigate it kindly, we can see its fragility. It reminds me of a time that I was on retreat a few years ago, and I got paired up with someone for mindful work tasks, a yogi job. And we were supposed to sweep this forest path. But they kept sweeping towards me, which meant I had to keep backing up. And I started inventing this whole story about their ego and their control issues and, maybe even their upbringing. Who knows where I went? But then I caught it. Not their sweeping, but my mind. And I stood there and silently said, may I be free from ill will. May we both be at peace. And something shifted. My companion looked up and smiled. I'm not sure if they sensed that any tension had dropped, but I sure did. The anecdote here is loving kindness, metta, holding ourselves and others with goodwill, compassion for ourselves and others, and seeing the suffering behind the anger, forgiveness practice, and reframing our thoughts with loving kindness. Compassion for ourselves and others, seeing the suffering that's happening behind the anger, forgiveness practices, and reframing our thoughts with loving kindness. This is why in practice, sometimes we can choose to lead with loving kindness. We can start our practice with loving kindness, and it sort of loosens the grip of ill will and lets us see clearly. Bill Fronsdale reminds us, metta isn't just a practice for others. It's also how we turn toward our anger with patience and care. Metta isn't just a practice for others. It's how we turn toward our anger with patience and care. So now we come to number 3, sloth and torpor. One of the antidotes for sloth and torpor is investigation and curiosity and engagement with energy. But let's just go to sloth and torpor, and then we'll get to the antidotes. I call this fog. It's like mental molasses, sloth and torpor. It's like a cozy blanket that we didn't mean to wrap ourselves in during the meditation. Now this hindrance is tricky because sometimes we actually need rest. It's not wrong to be tired, but on the cushion, it often comes cloaked in stories like, this meditation isn't working, or maybe I'll just try again later. We're at home on our cushion, we can just get up and not sit anymore. And as the Buddha described, just as water covered with moss and water plants is not clear or limpid, so too a mind affected by sloth and torpor is not malleable or bright. So that's another one of those descriptions. Just as water covered with moss and water plants is not clear, so too a mind affected by sloth and torpor is not malleable or bright. So, let's be honest. I nod off plenty of times, in an hour of sitting practice. And sloth and torpor are completely normal parts of human condition, especially on the cushion. There isn't any shame that's needed. Sloth refers to physical sluggishness or inertia, and torpor is mental dullness or fog, sleepiness or heaviness, confusion or that sense of why bother. So together they form a kind of resistance, not dramatic, just quietly convincing. I don't really need to meditate right now, or let me just drift here in stillness. It's a very pleasant place to be. But the heart of sloth and torpor is this. We really don't want to know. We don't want to engage. We don't want to be curious. We don't want to investigate. The very nature of the state pushes us away from energy and interest. And we don't want to do a thing. We don't want to move the mind. We don't want to look at anything. We don't want to know anything. That's just the characteristic of sloth and torpor. So how do we meet this sleepy haze? Not with self-judgment or harshness, but with wise effort. And there are many ways to reawaken the heart and mind. We can reflect on the Buddha's own perseverance. We can remember the presence and power of awareness itself. We can think of teachers or fellow practitioners who've sat through the fog and found clarity. And one of the things that the Buddha suggested in going deeper is to reflect on the preciousness of this life, the preciousness of this moment. None of us knows for sure what, that will wake up with another chance to practice. And it's not morbid, it's motivating. It reminds us to value this breath, this very moment of seeing the truth of things. We can reflect on the power of awareness. We can reflect on death, the inevitability of it, the unpredictability, the unpredictable stability of the timing of one's death. There's no way of knowing. And somehow it has a way of grounding the mind when we're in the middle of sloth and torpor. And we can say, you know what? Maybe I'll take a look right now. Maybe it's time to brighten up the mind and just look right now what's happening. There isn't, none of us know for sure that we're going to wake up and have a chance to practice again. So we can reflect on that. And when we keep that reality close in our mind, it doesn't mean we have to get morbid. We tend instead to get fearful, running around doing everything that we hope to do before we pass away. And we can recognize just how precious the time is when we have the opportunity, as we do here when we meditate, to just look, to just practice, to just really try to understand a little bit more the nature of these states of mind that cause so much suffering. Sayadaw U Tejaniya offers this gentle advice. If you feel bad about sleepiness, it means you have aversion toward it. Simply recognize and accept it. As long as you observe and have the right attitude, you're meditating correctly. Not feeling bad about the sleepiness and just noticing really, oh, there's aversion there, recognizing it and accepting it. And as long as we observe it with the right attitude, we're meditating correctly. So don't fight it and don't indulge in it either. No need to shake it off or pretend it's not happening. Just be aware and be curious. That's energy coming to the moment. That's the path. And if you find you're indulging or lost in it, we can mindfully open our eyes or rising to stand, and we can reset the energy of the moment. We can let our eyes open a little, let light in. Aya Ananda Bodhi, she says, what's needed is a gentle energy, like the rising of the sun, rather than the flipping on of a light switch. That's a good one. Rising of the sun, much more gentle than flipping on both the light switch. I once meditated in a redwood grove, and the birds were chirping and the wind was in the trees, and I found myself getting drowsy. And I thought, maybe this is deep peace. But then I noticed my chin on my chest, not deep peace, just deep snoozing. What helped? I opened my eyes, sitting with a little more uprightness, and inwardly saying, let's brighten up a little, just brighten up the mind. And sometimes walking meditation, inside or outside, helps reawaken that vitality too. And humor can help. Tamil masters once joked that when Sloth and Torpor arrive, she greets them like old dogs. Oh, you again, sit by the fire. I've got things to do. Just go sit by the fire. I've got things to do. So some of those antidotes were a sense of curiosity and gentle engagement and investigation and energy with maybe mindful movement, reflection on urgency and death, brightening the mind through light walking meditation, joyfully recollecting our good deeds and those of others is also gratitude, bringing in gratitude. Helps brighten the mind, just to begin again. Then we have restlessness and worry, the fourth one. This is what I call the mind spin cycle. Restlessness and worry, restlessness and worry, restlessness and worry, our old friends in the mental spin cycle. And this hindrance shows up as agitation, mind chatter, regret, and just that slightly itchy feeling that you should be doing something else, anything else besides meditating. Restlessness is what we often call the wandering mind. As my teacher, Steve Armstrong, says, you sit down to follow your breath, and before you know it, you're mentally organizing your garage, reviewing a conversation from 2015, and planning the next 3 meals. You don't even realize you've boarded the thought train until you're 5 stations down the track. And it's so common. It's practically the national pastime of the untrained mind. But here's the good news. With mindfulness, we start catching and wandering, we catch the wandering sooner. Maybe not before the train leaves the station, but hey, maybe we hop off by the second stop instead of riding to the end of the line. And at first we might think a session where the mind only wanders twice is better than where it wanders 45 times. But if you're catching it 45 times, that's 45 moments of waking up. And that's actually less restlessness, not more. So if you've noticed your mind drifting again and again and again, maybe even in today's sit, congratulations. That's awareness in action, and that's training. And the antidote to this jittery squirrel mind, there's calm, there's forgiveness, there's patience, there's a kind, steady breath, and a willingness to begin again, over and over. As the Buddha said in one of the Dhammapada verses, just as a fish that is taken from its watery abode and cast on land will thrash about, even so does the mind flutter about when it is entangled in the net of restlessness. Just as a fish that is taken from its watery abode and cast on the land will thrash about, even so does the mind flutter about when it is tangled in the net of restlessness. That's Dhammapada verse 34. That's a really great resource. So the next time your mind's flopping like a fish, take heart. Gently scoop it up, breathe, and place it kindly back in the water of awareness. You're not failing, you're just learning to swim. The Buddha also said in the Dhammapada, the mind is difficult to control. And how true that is. Swiftly and lightly, he says, it moves and lands wherever it pleases. Don't we know? It's a good time to tame the mind, for a well-tamed mind brings happiness. The mind is difficult to control. He's speaking nothing but the truth. It's certainly difficult to control. And we can't control the mind, but what we can do is recognize where it goes. And when we recognize where it goes, we're not caught in the restlessness or the wandering mind. Just as water stirred by the wind is not still, so too a mind affected by restlessness and worry is not concentrated. A basic framework for understanding the causes for arising of restlessness and seeing it as imbalance of concentration and energy. Restlessness often comes from an excess of energy and not enough concentration or steadiness of the mind to hold it. It's as if the energy is spilling over the edges of a container. The imbalance can arise from different causes. It can come from unwise attention to our thoughts or to mental states of unrest. And we get drawn into the content of our minds. And this is particularly true of people with a predilection for thinking, which is most all of us. We just need to see this tendency clearly. Ayasantusika teaches, the heart often needs forgiveness more than it needs solving. Restlessness and worry can be met with compassion. And so the antidotes for restlessness and worry is calm, relaxing of the body and mind, grounding in the present moment by returning to the breath, self-forgiveness and letting go of the past, and offering ourselves kindness and compassion with patience. In nature, restlessness is like wind across the lake. It disturbs the surface, but not the depths. When the wind settles, clarity returns. So when restlessness and worry are happening, we can think about the wind going across the lake, just disturbing the surface, but not the depths. Gil Fronsdale puts it this way: restlessness loses its grip when we return to the body. It's the mind's way of fleeing discomfort. But mindfulness brings us home. When I was going through that flat tire debacle this morning, I found connecting in with my body awareness and discomfort where I felt it in the body really helped ease my restlessness and impatience around it a lot, because I was all caught up in this restlessness and worry phase. And it seemed like those waves across the water were deeper than just the surface, but I connected with my body. I gave myself kindness. I had gratitude for the speed with which they really got me in, and I had gratitude that it was easy for me to get there and get home. And so it loses its grip when we really come back to the body. The mind's way of fleeing discomfort, but mindfulness can bring us back home. So the fifth of the hindrances is doubt. And the antidote for it is faith in effort and trust and awareness and just remembering past clarity and insight. So we come to doubt. not what I would call healthy skepticism, but paralyzing indecision. Is this the right technique? Am I even capable of awakening? What am I doing here? The Buddha said in one of the suttas, there is no other thing so obstructive as doubt. It withers the growth of wholesome states. No other thing so obstructive as doubt. It withers the growth of wholesome states. Doubt is very difficult to see. Very difficult to see is doubt. It's a confused state of mind that doesn't know what to do or whether to do it or when to do it or should I do or shouldn't I or will I or won't I? Can I? Can't I? Are they right? Are they wrong? What should I do? And in some ways, we can see it caused by really the profusion and proliferation of spiritual options that we have in the West now. The libraries and bookshelves and bookstores and internet, just full of the spiritual traditions from all over the world. And we have everything at the click of our mouse. It's confusing. I don't know if you've tried to make any sense of it all, but there's a lot out there. Some of it's contradictory and confusing and bewildering, and it takes a whole different language that you sort of have to learn from one book to the next. And what are we going to do? How are we going to know for ourselves what is right understanding? What's the right path? What's the right technique? Who is the right teacher for me? We certainly can't try them all, and so we pick one. We do what we can. We can't help but occasionally come across doubt. Doubt will arise in the mind. We've heard about something else. We've heard about another teacher, another path, the quick way. I like the sudden enlightenment one, but it didn't work for me. So on this long, slow, slogging path, nevertheless, doubt arises in the mind. And it's very difficult to see doubt for ourselves, partly because, part of our educational training and conditioning is to take it all in and to reflect on it and to weigh it and evaluate and use rationality and think about things and try to figure things out. And that's what we do with spiritual practice. But doubt cannot be overcome by thinking. We can borrow someone's confidence to practice, but our own practice has to reveal the truth to us for us to be free of doubt. The most a teacher or teaching can give you is temporary loan of their confidence so that you'll practice. And through your own practice, you come to truth. You'll have no doubt, but don't mistake my confidence for your truth. You need to practice. You need to do the practice to come to your own confident understanding of the truth. And doubt sneaks in like a fog. It doesn't shout, really, it whispers. On my first long retreat, I had one day where I thought, I'll just leave after lunch. I'd gotten what I came for, but the next day, sitting in the hall, everything softened and the doubt had passed. And last month, when I was at Cloud Mountain listening to a student at that retreat who had practiced for quite some time, and he was really ready to what they call roll up the mat. He seriously was sure he was going to leave. And the same thing for him. By the next day, something had shifted by looking directly at the mind. And he felt more assured than ever of his practice. Kamala Master says, doubt isn't resolved by finding answers. It's resolved by looking directly at the mind that is doubting. So it's like awareness of awareness. We're looking directly at the mind that is doubting, not resolved by trying to find answers. And Aya Ananda Bodhi says, faith doesn't mean certainty. It means walking the path even when we don't know exactly where it leads. So the antidotes here are confidence, or saddha, which is not a blind faith, but it's a growing trust in awareness itself. The trust that presence, even in confusion, is enough. And nature helps too. Standing quietly in the woods somewhere, surrounded by trees, older than you are, and suddenly you realize, I don't need to figure it all out. I just need to keep going. Like I like to say, meditate and keep going. We can gain confidence, we can develop faith and effort, trust in awareness itself, and we can remember past clarity and insight. So seeking wise spiritual friends and trusting direct experience over thinking are all good ways of employing antidotes to doubt. And our confidence gets gained. Faith is also called confidence in the practice, and it can gain momentum, one mindful moment after the next, and we gain confidence in our practice, and we can trust in awareness itself. So these are the 5 hindrances. Desire, which narrows, ill will, which burns, sloth and torpor, which dulls, restlessness and worry, which scatters, and doubt, which freezes. And yet all of them are workable. They're not enemies to be fought, but clouds to be seen. With mindfulness, they lose their solidity. And with compassion, they lose their sting. And with calm forgiveness and confidence to keep going with humor, they become familiar companions on it. So I'm going to end with a quote from Gil Fronsdale. The 5 hindrances are not 5 problems. They are 5 invitations to return, to soften, to wake up. May we continue to walk this path with courage, with kindness, and just enough curiosity to meet whatever shows up. So let's just sit for a few minutes and let the words isn't about being free from hindrances. It's about learning to walk kindly with them and letting them teach us. First, I'd like to begin reflections on sharing a lesson, which is on the back. Chant the verses of sharing and aspiration through the goodness that arises from my practice. May my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest devas and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless through the goodness that arises from my practice and through this act of sharing. May all desires and attachments quickly cease and all harmful states of mind until I realize Nibbana. In every form of birth, may I have an upright mind with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold or weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I'm going to take a moment to put in the chat here for later some opportunities for sharing the Dharma. And if I can't find it shortly enough, I'll just say it's located on the website. And there's a Donna button there. Okay. And it's also really nice to have regular contributions because we are so happy to have this room, no matter how many of us show up. And it's really nice to have regular support, knowing that we can continue paying rent here and continue paying for other teachers that come. Coming up very important, and next week is Trina, and in 2 weeks after that, there are 2 nuns that are coming from Olympia.
2 weeks after?
It's in 2 weeks. It's August 9th. And they were at Aloka Vihara in California also, and now they are in Olympia. So they will be teaching here. One of them, and they'll be available for answering questions and stuff like that. So the questions, Go back to my notes to find the questions. And I'm going to stick those in the chat too. Which of the 5 hindrances tend to show up most often for you, and how do you relate to it? What practices or insights have helped you work skillfully with doubt or restlessness? What is the gentle way? What is one gentle way you can cultivate an antidote this week? Contentment, loving kindness, energy, calm, or confidence? Can you see how becoming aware of the hindrances arises simultaneously with realization that they are not you and not even personal? So those are some questions to contemplate, and we'll stop and talk about it. And for those of you who are on Zoom, see you next time. Bye for now.